Shepherd's Oath. Chapter 1. A Boy Among Hills. In the hill country beyond Caerwyn, where bramble hedges tangled like thorned wire and the wind forever whistled through the stone bones of old Roman watchtowers, lived a shepherd boy named Alric, son of Madden. His world stretched from the frost-lined stream by the southern fields to the jagged cliffs of Harlow, where sheep grazed on perilous slopes. He was 16 winters old, though hunger had kept him lean and long-limbed, with hands like knotted rope and hair the color of ash bark. Alric's life was ruled by the rhythms of sheep and storm. At dawn, he'd sling his cloak over his shoulders, patched wool too short at the wrists, and whistle for his dog, Geth. The two would set off with the herd, crook in hand, pouch of barley bread and onion slung over his chest, and not return until the sun dipped behind the ridge and the ravens began to circle. It had been a cruel spring. Snow clung longer than it should, and even now in early bloometide, the wind bit like a blade. His mother, Elswith, had taken ill over winter, with a cough that rattled her ribs like sticks in a sack. Their stores had thinned, and Alric had begun to boil sheep bones twice to stretch the broth. His father, Madden, had died 5 years past, conscripted by the Baron to fight in some far-off skirmish against the Duke of Brackenford. His sword had come home in a box. The sword had rusted by the hearth ever since, a thing too heavy for a boy, too bitter for a widow to polish. It was on the 4th day of the month that Alric found the first ewe dead. He had just reached the cliffs of Harlow, where the land dropped away in sudden violence. The sheep milled at the edge of the meadow, bleating nervously. Geth growled low, fur prickling. Alric knelt near the carcass. The body was intact, but the throat had been ripped wide. Blood soaked the grass in a crescent arc, yet none had been drunk. No meat torn. Not the work of a fox. Not even wolves, who killed from hunger. Not sport. He touched the wool, still warm. The wound was clean, almost surgical. Geth whimpered, backed away. "Wheezy," Alric murmured, rising. He scanned the tree line. The firs stood still. No birds, no rustling. He brought the flock home early that night, stomach tight with unease. His mother looked up from the hearth as he entered. "You're pale," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Weather turn?" "One of the ewes is dead," Alric said, pulling off his cloak. "Throat torn clean through. Not eaten." Elswith frowned. "Wolf?" "Not a wolf. It wasn't messy. Like someone slit it with a knife, but wide. Maybe some passing road." Geth didn't bark, just shivered. His mother's face went still. "Take the flocks further west tomorrow, closer to the elder grove, and say your prayers before you sleep." Alric nodded, but he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, crook on his lap, watching the tree line, listening. The next morning, another ewe was gone. Chapter 2. Blood in the Grass. Alric rose before dawn, the sky still smeared with indigo. A mist clung to the slopes like wool, thick and low, hiding even the fences. The hut creaked with the breath of old timber, and the only sound was his mother's cough, dry and hard, from her straw mattress in the corner. He ladled out the last of the oat porridge into a wooden bowl. but his appetite was gone. When he stepped outside, he found Geth already pacing near the pen, nose to the ground, tail stiff. The sheep huddled in tight formation, anxious in the way that animals get when the world turns strange. Something in the air was off, too quiet, like the birds had fled before dawn. "Come," he whispered to the hound. "Let's count them." One by one, he marked them. 17, 18, 19. He stopped. 20 should have been the number, but there were only 19. "Damn," he muttered, jaw tightening. He checked again, slower. Still 19. He found the missing ewe near the western edge, where the pasture sloped down to a thicket of briars. She lay on her side, legs stiff, eyes open to the sky. Blood darkened her fleece at the neck. But this time, it was worse. The wound had been deeper, wider, as if something had clawed through muscle and bone. Ribs were cracked, yet still, not a bite had been taken, not a drop of meat disturbed. Alric stood frozen for a long while, the crook trembling in his hand. Geth snarled at the shadows in the hedge, ears flat, teeth bared. Suddenly, the boy remembered what the old priest had said last winter, muttering half drunk by the fire in the tavern when the snow kept everyone locked in town. There are things that stalk not for hunger, but for spite, spirits bound to land or oath, cursed shapes that wear flesh for penance. They bleed you just to watch you die. Alric had thought it nonsense then. Now he wasn't so sure. He hauled the carcass up with effort, dragging it away from the thicket. He buried it in a shallow pit beneath a rowan tree, muttering a half-forgotten blessing under his breath. Then he went to town. The village of Dunlow was little more than a crooked lane of timber homes, a chapel, and a forge. Smoke curled from the thatched rooftops as Alric strode through, clutching his crook tight. The reeve, a balding man with a beer belly and a boiled leather jerkin, leaned against the chapel post. "Boy," he grunted, "you're early for market." "I'm not here for market," Alric replied. "Something's killing my flock. 2 ewes now, throats torn, bodies left untouched." The reeve scratched his chin. "Foxes? No. 2 clean. No meat taken. Dogs then, stray or mad. I'll tell the tanners to keep theirs leashed." Alric stepped closer, voice lower. "It's not dogs. My hound won't go near the trees. He shivers. Doesn't bark, just backs off. Like he's scared of something not natural." The reeve gave him a long look. Then he spat. "If you're stirring talk of demons or fae, take it to the chapel, not me." "I'm not asking for coin," Alric said. "Just a warning. If it takes a lamb one night, it'll take a child the next." The reeve grunted. "Fine. I'll have the watchman patrol the roads a night or 2. But this is shepherd business. Keep your beasts penned." Alric left without another word. He passed the chapel, thinking of going in. The door stood open. Inside, the old priest, Father Barrack, knelt in prayer. But Alric didn't step through. Not yet. He returned to the hills before noon. And that night, he kept watch by the pen with Geth at his side. a pitch torch in one hand, his father's rusted sword in the other. He didn't sleep. He didn't blink. Not once. Chapter 3. The Watchfire. The fire cracked in the iron brazier, casting flickering shadows across the sheep pen. Alric sat with his back to the fence, one knee drawn to his chest, the old sword across his lap. The blade was dull, speckled with rust, but it still had weight, enough to kill if he had the courage. Geth lay curled beside him, head on his paws, ears twitching with every sound beyond the firelight. Owls called from the trees. Fox barked once from the east ridge, but it was the silence between that made Alric grip the sword tighter. Each time the wind shifted, he caught whiffs of wet earth, sheep dung, and something else. Rot. Old, sour rot, like spoiled meat left too long in the sun. Midway through the night, the hound stiffened. A low growl rose from Geth's throat, deep and primal. He stood, hackles raised, teeth bared toward the blackness beyond the pen. Alric stood too. The fire danced behind him, casting their long shadows like ghosts on the pasture grass. He whispered, "Where?" Geth didn't look at him, just stared, growling. The trees across the field swayed. Nothing moved. Then, suddenly, a sound. Not a howl. Not a growl. It was worse. A dry rasping, like claws dragged across bark. Alric's skin turned to gooseflesh. He strained his eyes into the dark, voice breaking despite his best effort. "I'm armed." The rasping stopped. Geth began to bark wildly, lunging toward the fence. Then, silence again. The sheep stirred, bleated nervously, and then, just on the edge of vision, something darted between trees. Fast, too fast, a blur of fur and shadow. Man-shaped, but wrong, hunched and loping. Alric didn't give chase. He knew better. He stood frozen, sword raised, breath shallow. He waited until morning. When the sun finally broke the eastern sky, he looked around and found no bodies, no blood. But one fence post was clawed, deep grooves, 3 slashes, wood splintered as though by iron talons. Later that morning, he went to the chapel. Father Barrick was an old man, his beard yellowed with candle smoke, his eyes clouded, but sharp when they fixed on a visitor. He sat behind the altar, polishing a silver chalice with a tattered cloth when Alric entered. "I need your help," the boy said, not waiting for greeting. Father Barrick paused. "Many do. There's something in the woods, killing ewes, stalking the flock. It came near the fence last night. My dog saw it. I saw it. Not clearly, but it wasn't man or beast." The priest sighed, setting down the chalice. "Tell me everything." Alric did, every word, from the first ewe to the claw marks. When he finished, Father Barrick rubbed his jaw, then stood slowly. He fetched a book, thick, leather-bound, older than memory. He opened it near the back, fingers trembling. "Long ago," he said, "a knight was cursed upon these hills, Sir Edric of Linden. Sworn to protect these lands, he broke his oath. abandoned his post during a siege to chase a personal vengeance. It's said his soul never left. Some claim he roams as a beast, furred and fanged, trapped between man and wolf until his honor is restored. Alric's throat tightened. A cursed night? The priest met his eyes, or something fouler wearing his shape. And what frees it? Beric hesitated. The legends vary. Some say only a man of no sword, no name, and no oath of war can face it. A common soul with courage unshaken. A shepherd, perhaps. Alric stared down at his calloused hands. The priest touched his shoulder. Take holy water, burn rowan wood, and if you see it again, speak its name. Sir Edric, Alric murmured. The priest nodded. May God steady your hand. Chapter 4. A Name in the Dark. That evening, Ulrich returned to the hills with a small flask of holy water tied to his belt and a bundle of rowan branches lashed over his shoulder. He'd carved a crude charm from birch, a cross etched with the sigil Father Beric had shown him, 2 intersecting lines with a broken ring beneath, the mark of protection against oath-bound spirits. The sheep were skittish. They pressed in close, bleating restlessly as twilight fell. Geth growled often now, never fully relaxing, ears twitching at every rustle. Ulrich built his fire higher that night. He set the rowan wood ablaze, watching the pale smoke curl upward like ghosts into the stars. It gave off a scent like bitter apple and ash. He sat beside it, hand resting on the rusted sword. The holy water warmed at his side. I know your name now, he said into the darkness. Sir Edric, if that's still what you are. No answer came, only the whisper of wind through tall grass. The hours crept by. The moon rose, bright and swollen. Then, a noise, closer this time, a snapping twig. Geth leapt to his feet, growling low. Alric stood too, facing the trees. Come out, he called, voice steadier now. I don't fear you. From the dark, something stepped into the firelight. It wasn't entirely man. Tall, broad, draped in shadowed fur. Its limbs were too long. Its face stretched forward into a wolfish snout, though the eyes, God help him, the eyes were human. Pale, sunken, rimmed red. Madness and pain gleamed within them. Alric froze, but he did not flee. The thing tilted its head, mouth half open, showing jagged yellow teeth. It sniffed the air, then spoke. You burned the rowan, it said in a voice like gravel and smoke. I can smell it on your skin. Alric's mouth went dry. Sir Edric of Linden, he said slowly. You are named. The beast reeled slightly, as though struck. Who speaks that name? It hissed. Who dares? I'm Alric, son of Madden, shepherd of the hill-lands. You are no knight, no sword-bearer, no, just a boy. He held up the cross. But I'm not afraid of you. The thing's lips curled. You should be. They circled each other at the pen's edge, firelight flickering across the field. The sheep huddled tight. Geth snarled, but didn't charge. Alric kept his grip tight on the sword, though he knew it would be no match for claws. "What do you want?" he asked. The creature's breath steamed in the cold. "What I was denied. Rest, blood, justice. My oath was broken, and now I rot between worlds." "Who cursed you? Who didn't?" the thing rasped. "The king who cast me out, the men I left to die, the priest who lied, the land itself. I was betrayed, so I betray. You kill sheep, frighten boys. That's not vengeance, that's cowardice." The creature froze, its eyes narrowed. For a moment, just a moment, something human stirred there. Shame or anger or both. Then it lunged. Alric rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the slash of its claws. Geth leapt, barking wildly, teeth flashing. The beast swatted the dog aside with a growl. Alric scrambled to his feet, thrusting the rusted sword forward. It struck flesh, barely. The creature hissed and drew back, black blood seeping from its side. "You bleed," Alric whispered. "That means you can die." The thing bared its teeth. "Not by your hand, boy, but perhaps by your heart." And with that, it vanished into the trees. Chapter 5. The Broken Sword. The next morning, Alric awoke beside smoldering coals, aching and cold, with Geth curled against his side. The rowan fire had burned to ash. The sheep were safe, but his mind was not. The creature had spoken, had reasoned. It bore pain and shame, yes, but also memory. Alric couldn't shake the way it said, "Perhaps by your heart." What did that mean? Back home, Elswith noticed the torn sleeve and bruises on her son's arms. "Another wolf?" she asked, trying to sound light. Her voice was strained. "No," Alric said quietly, pouring water into the pot. "Not a wolf." She waited for more, but he gave none. He sat near the hearth that evening and pulled the rusted sword onto his lap. It had belonged to Matten, his father. Alric had never learned its story. No crest marked the blade, no engraving save for a faint notch near the hilt, as if someone had struck it against stone in anger or desperation. He cleaned it slowly with a cloth soaked in vinegar and ash, trying to polish the rust away. Beneath, the metal was dull gray, old but strong. "Would you have run from it, father?" he whispered, "or faced it, as I must?" Elswith sat beside him then, threading a bone needle through wool. "Your father didn't like killing," she said softly, "but he did it when it was needed. I don't think this thing can be killed like a man." She looked at the sword, then at him. "You'll find the way. You always do." That night he returned to the woods, not to fight, but to learn. He followed the path, deeper past the briar thicket where the ewe had died, down to the ruins of an old watchtower that had once belonged to the Knights of Linden, before the order fell to time. There, beneath moss and root, he found stone, and beneath the stone, bones, human bones, not scattered, but laid out purposefully, as if once buried, then later disturbed. A rusted helm sat atop the skull. A broken gauntlet nearby bore the sigil of a crowned boar. Alric's heart pounded. He whispered, "Sir Edric." Nothing answered, but the wind shifted. From the tree line came a whisper, Not words, but memory, a flicker, a vision. The sky filled with smoke. Men shouted. Edric, bloodied, dragging a wounded boy across the mud. Arrows fell like rain. Then, Edric turned away toward the hills, away from the battlefield, abandoning his post. Then a scream, his name, shouted by comrades who would never make it home. The vision vanished. Alric dropped to his knees, breath ragged. This curse, it wasn't just punishment. It was grief. Guilt turned into flesh. He returned home shaken, unsure what to do. But one thing was certain. He could not fight this thing with steel alone. He needed answers. And there was only one man old enough to remember the truth of Sir Edric's fall. Old Corwin of Alderfen, the hermit who had once served under the banner of Linden, now a half-blind recluse living near the Salt Road. Alric would seek him out. Chapter 6. The Last of Linden. The Salt Road was older than the kingdom. It twisted through gullies and over old Roman stones, slick with moss and rutted by cartwheels no longer in use. Alric traveled it by foot, with Geth trotting ahead and a wrapped barley cake in his satchel. The morning sun gave no warmth. A thin mist clung to the bracken, and the crows wheeled silently above. He passed no other travelers. No one used the road unless they had to. Corwin of Alderfen lived alone in a moss-choked cottage at the foot of the chalk hills, surrounded by a thorn hedge and a row of bent wooden poles strung with dried garlic and bird bones. Some claimed he was mad, others cursed, but Alric had heard the whispers in the tavern. He rode with Sir Edric once, back when Linden still had banners. Alric pushed open the gate and stepped into the garden. Geth whimpered uneasily. The old man appeared before Alric could knock, tall despite the stoop of his spine, bearded like a wild man and blind in one eye. His left hand held a whittling knife, still dripping with sap from the rowan branch he'd been carving. "You bring death behind you," Corwin rasped. Alric stiffened. "Only questions." Corwin looked past him. "Then ask them, Shepherd. The woods are listening." They sat inside by a peat fire. Corwin poured something strong-smelling into a pair of horn cups. Alric sipped and winced. It tasted of mold and smoke. "I need to know what happened to Sir Edric of Linden," Alric said, "and what became of the oath he broke." Corwin nodded slowly, his good eye narrowing. "A long tale, but perhaps the land is ready to hear it again." He stared into the fire. It was the spring of the Black Banner War. Aaron Taine's men came south, burning and hanging, and worse. Edric led our garrison, 30 knights and thrice as many squires. We were outnumbered 5 to 1. But the worst blow wasn't swords. It was betrayal. Taine bribed our steward, opened the gates of Linden under moonlight. Chaos followed. Fires, screams, blood in the chapel. In the thick of it, Edric vanished. We thought he'd fallen. Until weeks later, word came he lived. Hiding, hunting deserters, killing those who'd fled the field or broken their vows. Corwin spat into the fire. Men called him the Oath Hunter. They said he'd gone mad. Obsessed. Stopped fighting Tane's men entirely. Just stalked our own, one by one. And when the war ended, he didn't stop. Not until they dragged him down and cursed him for his sins. Alric frowned. So he became what he hated. A traitor, hunting traitors. Corwin nodded. The land wouldn't bury him. The priest's curse bound him to his broken vow. Now he walks the hills, twisted by rage, and he'll kill until the oath is settled. But how, Alric asked, can it be done? Corwin hesitated. Then, with a shaking hand, he pulled a scrap of cloth from a chest. Wrapped inside was a shard of blackened steel, jagged and faintly warm to the touch. This was Edric's true blade, Corwin said, broken when he fell. If it's returned to his place of betrayal, where he turned his back and fled, then maybe, just maybe, the land will accept his penance. Alric held the shard gently. Where was that? Corwin's voice dropped to a whisper. Harlow Cliff, at the cairn beneath the ash tree, where the sheep won't graze. Alric stood. Then that's where I'll go. Corwin's blind eye twitched. You carry the courage, but beware. He'll not let you come near without a fight. Chapter 7. The Cairn Beneath the Ash. By dusk, Alric had returned to the pastures, but not to his flock. He gave his mother a kiss on the brow, told her only, I may be late, and left with the broken shard wrapped in linen, tucked into the folds of his cloak. The sheep would stay penned that night. Geth walked at his side, without protest, ears low. The wind had changed. It no longer smelled of heather and damp soil, but of something old and cold, like rusted metal and grave mold. Even the crows were silent. Harlow Cliff stood as it always had, jagged, wind-beaten, crowned with the twisted silhouette of the lone ash tree. But now Alric saw it differently. The grass there never grew thick. The sheep avoided it. And beneath that skeletal tree sat a pile of stones, weathered, mossy, and uneven. A cairn. This, Corwin had said, was where Edric had abandoned his oath, where he'd stood, looked back at his comrades dying in fire, and turned away. Alric knelt by the stones. They bore no inscription, no memory, no name, only silence. He unwrapped the broken blade. It pulsed slightly in his hand, only faintly beneath metal. Cold, but alive. I know what you did, Alric said into the dusk. You failed them. You turned your back. Behind him, the wind fell silent. He didn't turn. You were a knight. You swore to protect the innocent. But your oath was more to your pride than to your men. And you've suffered for it, bled for it, and bled others who had nothing to do with your shame. Still, silence. I'm here to end it. He rose and stepped toward the cairn. That was when the howl came. It split the twilight like a dagger. Low, guttural, full of rage. From the tree line to the west, the creature emerged, taller than before, shoulders hunched, claws like black iron, breath steaming in the cold. Alric turned and faced him. "Sir Edric," he said, loud and clear, "I bring you your blade." The creature slowed. It sniffed the air. Then it laughed, a horrible broken sound. "Too late," it rasped. "You think a shard will end this curse? You think memory can mend blood? I think you're tired," Alric said. The beast hesitated. "You've wandered these hills for years, killing sheep and chasing shadows. But you're not a monster, not really. You were a man once, a proud man. You made a mistake, and now you suffer." The creature's snarl faltered. Alric took another step forward. "Let me bury this blade. Let me bury your oath." The wind stirred, but the creature lowered its head, eyes burning. "No, you must fight me. Test my oath with your flesh. Only then can it be weighed." Alric drew his rusted sword, not to attack, but to lay it down. "I won't fight you," he said, "not with steel." The creature roared, charging. Geth sprang between them, barking furiously. Alric fell to one knee, holding out the broken blade in both hands. "Take it," he shouted. "End this." At the last moment, the creature stopped. Its claws trembled inches from Alric's face. Its breath came in ragged gasps. Then, slowly, it reached forward. Clawed fingers brushed the shard. The creature shuddered. Light, pale and gold like morning sun, flared around the broken blade. The beast cried out, not in rage, but in pain, in release. Its body began to change, shrinking, curling in on itself. Fur fell away like ash. Bones cracked. The snout receded, until at last, kneeling beside the cairn, was a man. Naked, gaunt, covered in scars and age. Sir Edric of Linden. He looked up at Alric with hollow eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I remember now." Alric gently lowered him to the ground. "Is it done?" he asked. Sir Edric nodded once, faintly. Then he died. Not violently, not with terror. Just faded, like fog in sun. Alric laid the blade across his chest and covered him with stones. Section 8. Ashes and Rain. It rained the next morning. Not a storm, but a steady, misting drizzle that softened the hills and ran cold fingers down the back of Ulrich's neck. He trudged home slowly from the cairn, mud clinging to his boots. Gath padding beside him, without his usual alertness. Neither boy nor hound spoke or made a sound. The weight of the broken blade was gone. But something else remained. A heaviness behind the eyes. A silence in the mind. When he reached his cottage, the chimney was cold. He pushed open the door. "Mother?" A cough answered. He found Elswith curled beneath furs, pale and shivering. The fire had burned out during the night. "You're worse," Alric murmured, kneeling beside her. "I'm cold, lad. That's all. Where did you go?" I did what I had to, he said. It's done now. He lit the hearth with dry kindling, brewed her elderflower tea, and sat by her side. He didn't tell her about Edric's face, or the last word the night had said. He told her only that the sheep were safe now. And it was true. That day and the next, and the one after that, no ewes were lost. No claw marks appeared. Geth did not growl at shadows. The flock grazed easy, even near the ash tree. Word spread through Dunlow slowly. The reeve asked no questions. The priest gave a small, private mass for a soul long dead, and Alric, he returned to his hills. But the peace felt thinner than he expected. A week passed before the strangers arrived. 2 of them, riders in chainmail and green cloaks, their horses heavy with road dust and saddle packs. They stopped in the village square, their banners rolled, their eyes alert. Alric saw them from the pasture ridge and made his way down. When he arrived, the older of the 2 was speaking with the reeve, searching for something buried, a relic lost during the Banner War. Our records name this region. The reeve shrugged. We've got nothing but sheep and wind. Alric stepped forward. You're looking for Sir Edric's blade. Both riders turned. The younger, a woman with short-cropped hair and a sword at her hip, raised an eyebrow. You've seen it. I've returned it. The elder narrowed his eyes. Explain. Alric did. He told the story again, this time stripped of myth and spirit. No mention of curses, no howling beast. Just bones on a hill, a broken blade, and a boy who buried it. The riders listened. When he finished, the elder nodded once. You've done more than you know. That blade was meant to be retrieved long ago, to complete the knight's burial rites. The Order of Linden was shamed by Edric's fall. Perhaps now we can seal that wound. The woman added, and you have Linden's blood, boy. Alric blinked. No, then you're rarer still. A shepherd who finishes what knights could not. They offered him coin. He refused. Instead, he asked for something else. Parchment, ink, and a record. A name, he said, for the cairn, so no one forgets. Days later, when the knights departed, they left behind a carved stone. Alric helped set it at the cairn's base beneath the ash tree. It read, Here lies Sir Edric of Linden, oath-bound and broken. May his penance be peace. Chapter 9, Winter's Edge. Autumn ripened fast in the hill country. The wind grew sharper. The trees wore cloaks of amber and fire, and the sheep's wool thickened against the cold. Alric patched the roof twice and stacked the woodpile high. His mother's cough, though persistent, had eased. She no longer woke bloody. At night, the fire burned warmer. There were even days when laughter returned to their cottage, quiet, like a memory rediscovered. But peace was not without shadow. Alric still woke sometimes with a start, heart pounding, dreaming of clawed hands and glowing eyes. Sometimes he thought he heard breathing in the walls of the trees. Sometimes Geth would lift his head at dusk, stare toward the hills, and whimper. Edric was gone, but not forgotten. One afternoon, Alric returned from pasture to find Father Beric waiting by the fence, leaning on his staff. The priest rarely left the chapel. especially not on foot. Geth sniffed him and let him pass. Beric nodded as the boy approached. "You've been quiet. Isn't that the way of shepherds?" Alaric said, forcing a small smile. "Not those who bury ancient curses." They sat together near the pen. The sheep grazed lazily in the golden light. Far off, a falcon wheeled above the woods. "I've been thinking," Beric said. "What you did, it was more than courage. You offered mercy to a monster. That's something men with swords often forget how to do." Alaric shrugged. "He wasn't always a monster. No, but few would have cared. Fewer still would have listened." The old priest placed something into Alaric's hand. A small, carved pendant, wood, shaped like a sleeping stag curled beneath a tree. Old, but smooth. Polished by time. "This was my father's," Beric said. "He gave it to me when I was too young to know what it meant. Now, I pass it to you." "Can't accept this. You must. It's a symbol of patience, of stillness, a reminder that not all battles are won by striking first." Alaric said nothing for a while. Then, "I don't know what comes next." Beric smiled softly. "No one ever does. But that's the secret. You don't need to." The frost came early. By midwinter, the roads to Caerwyn were near impassable, and the traders from the lowlands hadn't returned. Dunlow grew quiet. Nights were long. The sheep huddled close, and Alaric kept watch with Geth in the snow-flecked dark. One evening, as he returned from the ridge, he spotted something new by the cairn under the ash. A bundle of sage, laid neatly at its base, and beside it, a silver coin. He looked around. No tracks in the snow, no sign of who had come. Perhaps someone else had heard the tale, or owed Edric a memory, or maybe the land simply remembered its own. Alaric did not disturb the offering. He only knelt beside it and whispered, "Sleep, night. You're not forgotten." Chapter 10. The Messenger from the South. It was just past the solstice when the stranger rode into Dunlow. Snow still blanketed the higher slopes, and the trees glittered with hoarfrost, their limbs like frozen fingers grasping at the gray sky. Alaric was in the pasture repairing a broken fence rail when he heard Geth's distant bark echo across the valley. Not his usual bark. This was alert, insistent. By the time Alaric crested the ridge, a small gathering had formed in the village square. The stranger was dismounting, a man wrapped in furs, his cloak stained with salt and soot, a satchel strapped tight across his chest. His horse, a rangy roan, steamed in the cold. The man himself was narrow of face and sharp of voice, though he spoke with the flat tone of a messenger long used to hardship. "I seek Alaric, son of Madden," he announced, unwrapping a scroll sealed with black wax. The reeve looked up from his place on the steps of the chapel. "What for?" "By order of the House of Linden." A hush fell. Alaric stepped forward. "I'm Alaric." The messenger turned, giving him a long look. Then he unrolled the scroll and read, "To Alric of Dunlow, word of your deeds has reached the House of Linden through surviving brothers of the Order. It is our belief that the curse upon Sir Edric, once our captain, has been lifted by your hand, and that his burial was righteous. The Order offers you formal thanks and an invitation to ride south to Linden Hold to speak before our council. You are asked not as a subject, but as a witness, and perhaps more. Come if you will. There is no demand, only request." The messenger lowered the scroll. "They await you by thaw." Alric said nothing for a long time. The village murmured behind him. Finally, he asked, "Why me? I'm no knight." "No," said the messenger, "but you did what knights could not. That counts for something." That night, Elric sat by the hearth while Elswith stirred broth over the fire. The air smelled of rosemary and wood smoke. "You're quiet," she said. "They want me to go to Linden," he said, "to speak before their lords. Maybe more." She stirred the pot once, twice. "Will you?" "I don't know. I've never left the valley. The sheep, the hills. This is all I've known." She smiled faintly. "That doesn't mean it's all you ever will." He looked down at his hands, calloused, cracked, stained with pitch and soil. Shepherd's hands, but they had held a sword. They had buried a curse. Before dawn, Alric walked to the cairn beneath the ash tree. The offering was still there, though now the sage was frozen stiff. He knelt and whispered, "They remember you. They want to hear what happened." Chapter 11. The Road to Linden. Alric left Dunlow with little more than a cloak, a pack of salted cheese and oatcakes, and a satchel containing Father Barrick's pendant and the parchment of the Order's summons. Geth trotted beside him, silent and alert. He did not look back at the cottage, not when the sun crested the hills, not when the smoke from his mother's chimney disappeared into the cold air. He had said his goodbyes with few words. Elswith had nodded, touched his cheek, and whispered, "Find out what your courage is worth." The road south was no easy thing. The old salt trail twisted through gullies thick with brambles, over slick shale cliffs, and across icy brooks swollen with meltwater. He passed no travelers, save one ragged tinker dragging a cart with a broken wheel, who waved him off with suspicion. The world beyond Dunlow was wide and indifferent. No one knew his name here. No one knew what he'd done. He slept beside trees, wrapped in his cloak, with Geth curled against his chest. The fire never burned high. Too many eyes in the woods. On the 5th day, snow turned to rain, and he reached the market hamlet of Torwin. It was nothing like Dunlow. Stone-walled inns, a toll bridge, even a watchtower with a rusting bell. Traders crowded the muddy lane, shouting beneath oiled canvas stalls. Alric bought bread with one of the coins the Linden rider had left behind and ate it under an awning, watching a passing wagon bearing barrels of pitch and sacks of barley. Geth watched the street dogs warily. He was just about to move on when a voice called, "You headed south?" Alric turned. A boy about his age, lean and short, stood behind a dray horse, adjusting its yoke. He had the rough-cut look of a stable hand, but sharp eyes. "I saw the seal on your satchel," the boy said, nodding to the wax-stamped parchment. "Order of Linden. You going to the hold?" Alric hesitated. What look? He had grown up ferrying grain wagons between towns, knew every hill path and crooked footbridge, and claimed to have once outrun a mounted reeve on foot. They camped beside an alder grove the first night, with Bram talking non-stop about every town he'd ever been chased out of, every fish he'd ever caught, and which inns would serve you stew if you didn't look too poor. Alaric listened mostly, but somewhere after the second fire was lit, he laughed, an honest, startled thing that caught even him off guard. It felt like the first time in weeks that the shadows hadn't been close. Chapter 12. Through the Marsh Gate. By the third day of travel together, Alric and Bram left behind the wooded slopes of Torwin's Edge and entered the Marsh Gate country. Wetlands threaded with crooked causeways, skeletal trees, and mist that clung to the ground like a living thing. The locals called it the Hollow Mire. There were no inns here, no chapels, only hushed bird calls, half-sunken paths, and ruined waystones from older kingdoms. Geth stuck close, his paws squelching in mud. Bram grew quiet, and even his light jokes turned into whispers. "I hate this place," he muttered as they passed under a rotted arch. "It's where stories go to rot." Alric looked around. "It feels wrong." "It is. The Order used to keep patrols here, years back. When they pulled out, bandits filled the gap. And worse things too, if you believe the old-timers." Did believe them. Bram kept watch while Alric dozed. Then Alric took over after midnight, sitting with the sword beside him, eyes trained on the shadows. Sometime in the darkest hour, Geth lifted his head. A voice came, soft and low. "You carry a name that isn't yours." Alric rose slowly, hand on his blade. Bram stirred but didn't wake. The voice came again, from the fog. Sir Edric's shame was buried, but not forgotten. Alric stepped forward, heart thudding. "Who's there?" Shapes flickered in the mist. Tall, cloaked, unmoving. Then one stepped forward, a woman in dark leathers, her face half covered, eyes like cut glass. "We watched the cairn," she said. "We saw what you did, and we have questions." Geth snarled. Alric stepped in front of him. "Who are you?" "We are what the Order left behind," she said. "We are the ones they abandoned when they turned inward. The ones who buried the fallen without banners. We are the Broken Vigil." Alric had heard the name whispered once, long ago. A shadow group of former knights, squires, and outriders who had gone rogue after the collapse of Linden's border watch. Outlaws, some called them. Others said they were justice incarnate. "You want the sword?" he asked. "We want the truth." "I'm already on my way to give it." "Then remember this. Not all ears in Linden are there to listen. Some are only waiting to punish." She turned and melted into the fog, the others fading with her. When Bram awoke, Alric didn't tell him about the vigil, but he slept with his blade across his knees. Chapter 13. The Hold of Linden. They reached the gates of Linden Hold under a heavy sky. Clouds hung low over the valley, veiling the keep in a shifting gray mist that seemed to curl around the battlements like smoke. The hold itself rose from the cliffs like a carved monument. Towers of dark stone, ringed in ivy, with banners hanging limp in the still air. The sigil of the old order, a crowned boar on a red field, fluttered faintly above the gatehouse. Alric had expected more life, more soldiers, more noise. But the drawbridge was down, the portcullis unmanned. They crossed into the courtyard, boots echoing on the cobbles. Stable boys came quietly to take the horse. A squire in a dull green cloak appeared without a word and motioned them to follow. Alric looked once over his shoulder at Bram, who nodded. "You've got this," the boy whispered. "I'll wait in the stables. They don't need two mouths in the council hall." They led Alric through stone corridors that smelled of old parchment, wax, and damp wool. Tapestries hung, faded on the walls, scenes of ancient victories, saints in armor, beasts being slain. One showed a knight in silver, pushing back a host of shadows, a ring of fire circling his feet. Alric's guide stopped before two broad oak doors and gave him a brief glance. There waiting, Alric stepped inside. The chamber was octagonal, high roof, lit by thin shafts of light from arrow-slit windows. At its center stood a round table marked with the sigils of dead houses. Around it sat 7 men and women in varying states of armor and age. Some bore scars, others bore silence. All of them watched him as though measuring stone for weakness. At the head sat a broad-shouldered woman in polished mail, her white hair braided tightly behind her crownless helm. "I am Marshal Edrain of the Order of Linden," she said. "You are Alric, the shepherd who laid Sir Edric to rest. Yes, you've traveled far to speak truth. You may now do so." Alric told them everything. The dead ewes, the claw marks, the creature in the woods, the name, the curse, the blade buried beneath the ash tree. He spoke plainly. He did not embellish. He left nothing out, not even the moment Edric had nearly killed him. When he finished, the room was quiet. One of the council, a narrow-faced man with ink-stained fingers, shifted in his seat. "You expect us to believe this was not just a wolf made clever by fear?" Alric met his eyes. "Wolves don't speak. They don't bleed black. They don't remember betrayal," Alric asked. No one answered for a long time. Then Edrain said, "That depends. Would you take the oath?" Alric blinked. "What oath?" "The one Edric broke. To watch the borders, to guard the hills, to stand between the people and the dark, without glory, without coin, without ever being remembered." Alric thought of his mother, of the cairn, of the voice in the fog. He didn't answer right away, but in his chest something stirred like fire in winter. Chapter 14. Beneath the Stones. Alric spent the night within the stone belly of Linden Hold, in a small chamber near the servants' quarters, with a straw-stuffed mattress and a basin of cold water. Geth curled by the hearth, but he did not sleep deeply. He stirred often, ears twitching at faint hallway noises. Boots echoing, hushed voices, doors that creaked when no one was near. Alric lay awake, staring at the dark beams of the ceiling, replaying Marshal Edrin's words. Would you take the oath? He had expected recognition. Thanks, perhaps. But this, an invitation into something larger, older, and colder than he'd imagined, unsettled him more than the beast ever had. He had seen what happened to men who took oaths lightly, or took them out of pride. Edric had done both, and bled for it. Just before dawn, there was a knock at the chamber door. Bram's voice came softly through the wood. Up, now. Something's wrong. They moved through servant halls and forgotten passages, following torchlight and instinct. Bram had slipped a kitchen knife into his belt, and Geth walked low and stiff beside them. What happened? Alric whispered as they reached a narrow spiral stair. I overheard two squires talking. Bram murmured, said the council is divided. Some want to make you a watcher. Others want to make sure you don't speak again. Ever. Why? Because if you're right about Edric, if the curse was real, then the order failed. For years. That makes them weak. And someone here doesn't want that known. Alric's stomach turned. He remembered the narrow-faced counselor with ink-stained fingers, the one who dismissed him so quickly. They reached the chapel above the great hall. The stained glass shone with pre-dawn light. Saints with swords, angels holding torches, a boar being crowned by fire. There, beside the altar, stood Father Barrick. No, not Barrick. This priest was taller, leaner, dressed in green robes with gold thread hems, a ceremonial sword at his hip. His face was severe, watching. You're not supposed to be here, he said. Alric stepped forward. Who are you? I am Chancellor Vale, keeper of records and protector of legacy. That a fancy way of saying you bury the truth? Vale didn't flinch. You are a shepherd. Stay a shepherd. You don't know what it means to hold an oath. Edric was a failure, nothing more. Alric's voice dropped. He bled for that oath, and he repented. Repentance doesn't matter when the walls fall. He saved lives, even as a monster. Vale sneered. You should have let him rot. But instead you dug up the past. At that, two men stepped from the side aisle, silent, armored, hands near their hilts, swore under his breath. Alric looked to Vale. What now? You kill a boy in a chapel to protect your story? Vale smiled coldly. You misunderstand. You don't need to die. You just need to vanish. But before the guards could move, a voice thundered behind them. Stand down, but you must understand. Oaths are heavy, and they outlast your name. Alric looked at Bram, then at Geth, and finally to the broken seal on the scroll in his pack. I won't carry a sword for pride, he said. Good, Adrain said, because the true watchers don't wear glory, only mud. She stepped forward, hand outstretched. Well then, will you take the oath? Alric took a breath, then took her hand. Chapter 15. A Watcher's Burden. The ceremony was not grand. At dawn, under pale light and chill wind, Alric stood with knees in the wet grass before the shrine of the hollow saint. An ancient stone figure, cradling a bundle of kindling in one arm and a broken sword in the other. The Watchers of Linden did not kneel before kings, only before memory. Marshal Edrain stood beside him, flanked by 2 senior watchers, cloaked in gray wool and leather armor patched with time. "Speak your truth," she said. Alric swallowed and recited the words he had been taught the night before, simple and stark. "I stand where others fled. I guard what others forget. I speak no oath I will not die for. I am the watch between the hills." Edrain nodded once. From a box, she withdrew a clasp, iron, ring-shaped, stamped with the boar of linden and a single diagonal slash through its center. She pinned it at his shoulder. "Then rise, Watcher of the Hills," she said. "Your silence will be louder than banners." Alric stood. There was no cheer, no horn, only the wind, and the knowledge that he had stepped fully out of the life he'd known. By noon, he was packed and saddled. They gave him a cloak of rough weave, a fresh satchel, a short sword with no ornament, and a piece of parchment listing his first posting. Southern Ridge, Old Woodline Route. 2 weeks patrol. Not all patrols are war, Edrain told him at the gate. But every oath starts with a walk into nowhere. Graham walked with him as far as the outer stables, where Geth waited, tail thumping. 2 weeks? Bram said. "I thought you'd be posted near the keep for a while." "So did I," Alric said. "You going alone?" "Mostly. I've been paired with another. Watcher Dern. Old, quiet. Looks like a mule who's forgotten how to bray." Bram grinned. "Fitting." Alric chuckled. Then his expression turned sober. "You staying?" Bram shrugged. "They need stable hands. And I don't mind horses that don't try to stab me in the dark. So, for now." They clasped hands. "You saved my neck more than once," Alric said. "And I plan to remind you of that forever," Bram smirked. Alric nodded. "Keep safe." The southern road was narrow and flanked by trees blackened by old fire. Dern, the senior watcher assigned to him, said little. He walked with a slow gait and spoke with short, deliberate phrases. No torches after dusk. Light draws worse than beasts. They passed through hamlets with shuttered windows, broken wells, and empty watchposts. Alric asked what had happened here. Dern only muttered, oaths forgotten. They saw no monsters, but they saw signs. A shepherd's hut burned, a merchant's cart overturned and stripped, a trail of blood leading into the trees, and then nothing. That night, as they made camp beneath a gnarled sycamore, Alric asked, "Did you know Edric?" Dern didn't answer at first. "Then, he was my captain." Alric sat quietly. Dern added, "He ran, but he came back. That counts." Alric nodded. "Is that why they let me in?" "No, they let you in because you didn't." "Didn't what?" "Run." Chapter 16. Hollowmere. By the fourth day of patrol, the hills gave way to marshy lowland, and the remnants of old cobbled roads half buried in moss. Trees grew strange here, tall, colorless things with bark like bone and no leaves to speak of. The fog was heavier, clinging low, even under the sun. Birds no longer sang. Alric checked the map tucked into his satchel. There's supposed to be nothing here, just wild country. Who hadn't spoken since midday, grunted, "Wrong map." They topped a ridge, and Alric saw it. A village, not in ruin, but still standing, silent, unmoving, nestled at the edge of a narrow lake like a painting left to dry in dusk. It had no smoke, no movement, no sound. The sign at the edge read Hollowmere, letters faded but intact. Alric frowned. Never heard of it. Dern tightened the strap on his cloak. It was stricken from the rolls 30 years ago. Why? Dern didn't answer. Blades sheathed but hands ready. Geth patted ahead cautiously, ears lowered. The buildings were whole, thatch roofs, shuttered windows, stone walls all upright. Yet no one greeted them. Ulrich called out once, "Halloo, Watchers of Linden!" Nothing. They found a well, dry, a smithy with cold coals, an inn with tables still set for meals that were never eaten. On one door, someone had drawn a crude symbol in charcoal. A circle with 3 slashes through it. Ulrich paused. "I've seen that." Dern stopped. "Where?" "On the altar stone at the cairn. Carved into the side, Edric's name wasn't on." Dern's eyes narrowed. This place didn't die, it was sealed. They came to the village square. In its center stood a statue, ancient and lichen-covered. A woman with a veil over her eyes, holding a balance scale in one hand and a dagger in the other. "Justice," Alric murmured, but blind. He had wandered toward the chapel. Still standing, doors cracked open. Something about it pulsed with wrongness. They entered slowly. The pews were intact, but all the icons had been scratched away. Saints decapitated, angels disfigured. At the altar, the stone slab was bare but stained, black smears that reached toward the corners like veins. And in the middle, bones, human, arranged carefully, not buried, not burned, just laid. Alric knelt. "These are recent." Dern nodded grimly. "So much for Dead Town." A sound came then, from above. A voice, faint, female, singing in a language neither of them knew. They looked up. The belfry stood hollow, but the song came still. Geth backed away, whining. "Out," Dern said. "Now." They left the chapel without running, but only just. The moment they crossed the threshold, the singing stopped. The sun had dipped below the trees. The mist thickened. Alric turned to Dern. What was that? The older man's face was pale. Something left behind to remember. To remember what? Dern looked to the village sign, then the chapel. Hollowmere was a place that passed judgment, where none was asked. They tried to bind evil with fear, and now it feeds on it. That night, they did not make camp in the village. They found a dry slope, half a mile north, beneath an outcrop of stone, and built no fire. As they lay under wool blankets, Alric asked, "Should we tell the marshal?" Dern stared into the dark. "If we survive the night." Chapter 17. Shadows that walk. They broke camp before the first light touched the horizon. The sky still dark and heavy with mist. No birds stirred, no wind blew. The silence clung to them like breath on a mirror. Neither Alaric nor Dern spoke until the village had vanished behind the trees. Geth kept glancing back, tail low. Whatever was in Hollowmere, Dern finally said, "It knows we saw it." "You think it followed us?" "I think it never left." Alaric felt the hairs on his neck rise. "You've seen this before." "I've seen a dozen cursed places," Dern said, "but not one where the walls stayed standing. That thing in the belfry, that wasn't a ghost. Then what was it?" "Memory," Dern said flatly, "twisted into form." They made camp again that night by a black stream under a clutch of wind-warped pines. Geth refused to drink the water. Dern spread crushed wormwood around the camp's edge. A watcher's trick meant to confuse spirits and ward off unseen things. Alaric sat by the unlit fire pit, sharpening his blade with slow strokes. "Hollowmere was supposed to be forgotten," he said. "Because the Order willed it," Dern replied. "Too many questions, too much shame. Like Edric." Dern nodded once. "The Watchers didn't always guard from shadows. Sometimes we made them." That night, Alaric dreamed. He stood in the chapel again, but the pews were full. Villagers with eyeless sockets, staring forward, unmoving. At the altar stood the veiled statue, weeping black tears. From the rafters above, the singing voice returned, closer now, louder. No longer language, but a sick melody of grief. Then he saw her, descending from the belfry with robes like ash and hair trailing behind her like roots. Her face veiled, her fingers long and bloodless, scraping the walls as she floated down. He could not move. She reached the altar, turned to him, and whispered, "You freed the oath-bound, but you awakened the judged." He woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, Geth whining beside him. Dern was already up, staring into the trees. "I heard it too," he said. They left at first light and didn't stop until midday. They passed broken cairns, half-swallowed bridges, and twisted bramble walls that hadn't been there the week before. Whatever they'd disturbed in Hollowmere, it had changed the land. By the fourth day, they reached the outpost of Blackwood Cross, a watcher way station set deep in a bend of the southern ridge. It was little more than a round tower and 2 timber shacks beside a stone-paved courtyard. A watcher greeted them from atop the tower, young, red-haired, wearing a leather vest too big for him. "Dern," he called down. "Didn't expect you till next week." Plans changed. They entered, and for the first time in days, felt walls around them again. But Alaric didn't feel safe. Not yet. That night, he met the tower's steward, Watcher Vecca, a woman of perhaps 40 winters, with a limp in her left leg and a voice like a whetstone on iron. She poured him a mug of root-bitter ale and listened without interruption as he described Hollowmere. The bones, the chapel, the voice, the dreams. When he finished, she looked into her drink and said, "They say when a place is judged by man and not by law, it leaves a wound in the world, a hollow wound, the kind that grows teeth." Alaric looked up. "And what do we do about it?" She drained her cup. "We watch, we wait, and if it moves, we send fire." Chapter 18. The Stirring East. 3 days passed at Blackwood Cross. Alric helped repair the east wall, cleaned the arrow loops, and learned to trim candles with a wet blade so the wax burned slow and clean. Dern taught him how to mend boot soles and identify the edible mushrooms near the ridge path. The rhythm of work steadied him, but beneath it all, attention coiled. Something in the air had changed. The crows no longer circled. The deer no longer came to the glade. Even the wind felt strained, as if it passed through more than just branches. On the fourth morning, a horn sounded at the southern trail. Not the long call of warning, the three-note call of witness. Signs seen, oaths stirred. Send watchers. They met the rider in the courtyard, a woman with an oilskin cloak, her horse foaming and shaking. North Bend's chapel, she panted, gone, collapsed overnight. No quake, no rain, just ash. They found black feathers in the altar pit. Vecca cursed under her breath. You recognize that? Alric nodded. Hollowmere. The chapel. I heard her. She's spreading. The room fell silent. Then Dern spoke. She's not just haunting one village. She's following the oaths themselves. Vecca paced. Every place marked by broken vow or blood rite. If she's stirring them, she's drawing power from memory, feeding on it. Alric's voice was barely above a whisper. The judged. That night, the watchers gathered by torchlight. No ceremony, no grand words, just orders. We split into pairs, Vecca said. Alric and Dern will return to Hollowmere and trace what route the spirit is taking. We believe she's moving between sanctified sites, places bound to the old order. She's waking something older than any of us. Why us? Alric asked. Why me? Because she remembers you, Vecca said, and because you remember her. They departed at first light. The trail was quieter than before. The land unusually cold for late spring. Grass frostbitten, water sluggish. As they approached Hollowmere's valley again, the fog was already waiting, thicker now and wrong. It didn't drift, it stood, like it knew they were coming. Dern's voice was low as they crossed the final ridge. You still have the pendant the priest gave you. Alric touched the stag carving beneath his tunic. Always. Good. You'll need something to remind you what's real. They entered the village square. The statue in the center had changed. The scales were gone. Now, the veiled figure held 2 daggers, and her face was tilted downward, looking directly at them. Chapter 19. The Veiled Judgment. The square of Hollowmere no longer felt like part of the world. The mist was thicker inside the village than beyond it, curdled, yellow-white, and unmoving. Sound was swallowed whole. Their boots didn't echo. Geth whined softly and wouldn't cross into the center. Alric stared up at the statue. The woman's face remained veiled, but her stance had shifted. No longer passive, now her arms were extended, one dagger outstretched as if offering it or passing judgment. I don't remember it like this, Alric said quietly. Because it wasn't, Dern replied. This isn't a statue anymore. It's her. She's shaping the stone. She's shaping memory, twisting it into form, making it permanent. They circled the square. All the homes remained intact, but now bore the same carved symbol, the circle with 3 slashes. Fresh, wet-looking, as though the stone itself had bled to form them. "What do we do?" Alric asked. Dern crouched beside the well. "We trace her path. We find what she's tethered to. Spirits like this, if she is a spirit, don't roam without anchor." They returned to the chapel. It was worse inside. The bones had multiplied. Dozens of skeletal remains now lined the altar, in perfect symmetry. All posed identically, arms crossed, heads bowed, as if kneeling in eternal judgment. The altar was no longer a slab. It had become an obsidian table, slick and sharp, engraved with names. Alric approached. "Careful," Dern warned. But Alric had already leaned close enough to see. His name was there, Alric, carved cleanly beneath dozens of others. Some ancient, some fresh. He staggered back. "She knows me." "Because you unbound Edric," Dern said grimly. "You broke a curse. She feeds on broken things. Oaths, grief, guilt. You're a source now." Alric backed away. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to lift a curse. You just did the right thing. And now she's found you. Because you know how to unmake what was never meant to be touched." They turned to leave, and then the voice returned. Soft, musical, like a lullaby sung through a veil of salt water. "You freed the night. Now who will free me?" The doors slammed shut behind them. Alric drew his sword. The chapel darkened. The mist flooded through cracks in the stone. From the rafters, she descended. Not walking, not floating, unfolding. Veils trailed like river weeds. Her hands were longer than they should have been. Her face remained hidden, but beneath the veil, her mouth moved in rhythm with the singing. Words not meant for this world. She stopped above the altar and spoke directly into Alric's skull. "You carry the weight of the broken. Will you carry mine?" He stepped forward. "What are you?" She tilted her head. Then with a sudden crack of silence, the singing stopped. She whispered one word. Memory. The chapel walls groaned. The floor cracked beneath the altar. Black roots burst upward from the earth, writhing, twitching as if seeking flesh. Dern grabbed Alric and shoved him toward the door. "Move!" The doors burst open as they ran, Geth barking madly. The fog thickened behind them, howling with the shape of her song. The village began to shift. Walls curving where they should be straight, paths leading back into themselves. Only when they crossed the last old fence post on the outskirts did the mist break. Alric collapsed beside the road, gasping. Geth barked once, then lay down, panting. Dern stood over them, grim and pale. "She's not just a ghost," he said. "She's a wound in the world. And she wants me to carry her?" Alric asked, eyes wide. Dern nodded. "Because if you do, you become her anchor." Chapter 20, The Anchor and the Knife. They did not return to Blackwood Cross immediately. Instead, Dern led them north through a winding deer path that skirted Hollowmere's Ridge and descended toward the river stones, a place he claimed had once been a watch point for the Old Order. abandoned after the border fall years. They made camp under an overhang of shale. No fire, no speaking, just the damp, the dark, and the sound of Alric's breath slowly returning to rhythm. "She didn't try to kill us," Alric said, finally breaking the silence. "No," Dern replied. "She offered." "Why me?" "Because you broke something she could never touch." Alric looked down at his hands. "Edric." Dern nodded. "You didn't just free him, you forgave him." The land held his oath like a wound. "When you laid him to rest, the wound tried to close. And she feeds on wounds." "Exactly." Alric clenched his fists. "So she needs someone to carry her, like Edric carried his curse." Dern looked up from sharpening his blade. "Not quite. Edric became what he was cursed by. She's asking you to bear it for her, to be her new vessel, her anchor." Alric whispered, "What happens if I say yes?" "You'll survive, but not as yourself." Alric didn't sleep that night. Even Geth seemed unwilling to rest. He sat staring at the trees, as if waiting for the mist to reach them again. The next morning, they moved fast, south toward the chapel ruins of Fairbarrow, another old site, tied to the Order's early years, untouched since the first border lines were drawn. What they found there made Alric's stomach twist. The chapel was gone. Not collapsed, erased. Nothing remained but a smooth circle of scorched stone, as if fire had licked away every trace of mortar, wood, and memory. The grass within that ring grew in strange patterns, leaning outward away from the center. In the middle stood a single stone, black and sharp as obsidian, shaped like a dagger blade driven into the ground. On its surface, the mark, a circle with 3 slashes. Dern stared at it for a long time. "She's not following," he said. "She's spreading," Alric finished. A noise startled them both, hooves. A rider galloped into view, one of Vecca's outrunners, pale and breathless. "Message for Dern and Alric," he said. "Urgent. Marshal's command." He handed them a sealed scroll and turned his mount without waiting. Dern broke the wax, eyes narrowing as he read. Then he handed the note to Alric. "To Watcher Dern and Watcher Alric, the cairn at Linden's northern post has cracked. Night song heard across the hold, statues bleeding, veiled symbols carved into council doors. The order is compromised. Return immediately. Marshal Edrain." Alric lowered the note. "It's spreading faster than we thought." "She's not feeding off places," Dern said grimly. "She's feeding off remembrance. She's awakening wherever the memory of judgment still hurts." Alric felt something cold take root in his chest. "That means it won't stop." "Unless we find the first judgment," Dern said. "The original wound." Alric met his gaze. "And close it." That night, they turned west, toward the forgotten ruins of Valhalla, where the Order had once tried its first executions of oathbreakers, before law, before rights, before mercy, where the Veiled One was said to have first appeared. Chapter 21, Valhalla. Valhalla was not on any map. Even the oldest of the Order's scrolls named it only in rumor, a place of early judgment, a term used by watchers who wanted to forget that their beginning had once meant gallows and torches instead of walls and oaths. Alric and Dern crossed 3 ridges and a chasm bridge half rotted through, then followed a dry riverbed for nearly a mile. The ground was oddly level. No birds, no insects. Even Geth stayed silent. Here, Dern said at last. He crouched at a broken arch jutting out from the earth like ribs. The stone bore no symbols, only long gashes, as if something had tried to scratch its way out. They entered what remained of Valhalla. Stone foundations, scattered slate, one tree, leafless, growing in a perfect circle of dead grass. No buildings survived, but the earth remembered. Alric crouched. This was a square. Dern nodded. A place of gathering or sentencing. What happened here? Dern hesitated. The Order made its first judgment here. No trial, no defense. Just a woman accused of leading men to break their oaths. She never spoke in her own name, only sang. Alric looked up slowly. She sang? The first oath-tied execution. The moment the Order became something more than guardians. The moment they became judges. Alric swallowed, and she became the Veiled One. She never had a name, Dern said quietly. Only a charge. They found the gallows tree still standing, its limbs blackened and thick with moss. Ropes long since rotted, hung in strands like gray vines. Alric touched the bark, and the vision came. Not a dream, not like before, a memory. He stood in a square packed with men in chainmail and townsfolk shouting. A woman stood on the gallows, no veil, only long dark hair and bare feet. She did not weep. She did not curse. She sang a song of mourning, a song of rain, a song of something older than the Order. And then, judgment, a noose, a silence that screamed. And below her feet, blood spilled from the tree roots, as if the earth itself recoiled. Alric fell back, gasping. She wasn't a monster, he said. She was made into one. Dern nodded grimly, because she held memory, and memory is dangerous to power. Geth whined. From the edge of the ruins, the fog crept in again, slow, deliberate, not born of weather, but will. She's here, Alric whispered. She never left. The wind stirred, and then from behind the tree, she stepped forward. The Veiled One. No longer mist, no longer formless. She wore a simple white shift, stained at the hem. Her veil was sheer now, and beneath it, Alric glimpsed eyes. Not glowing, not monstrous, just sad. Her voice echoed, not in words, but in that same song he had heard at Hollowmere, in the chapel, in dreams. You freed the night, you bore the wound. Will you speak my name? Alric's lips trembled. I don't know it. She reached out, not threatening, inviting. From behind her, the tree cracked, and a shaft of light broke through gray clouds. Then give me one, she whispered, so I may sleep. Alric stepped forward. He thought of Elswith, of the hills, of Edtic's final breath, of justice that bled instead of healed. Then he said, the wind stopped, not monstrous, laid to rest. Chapter 22. The Silence After. The sun broke over Valhalla for the first time in generations. Elric sat on the dead grass beneath the withered tree, the bones of the veiled one now wrapped in a blanket of moss and woven cloth taken from his own pack. He dug a grave by hand, refusing Durn's offer to help, carving each stroke of earth with fingers numbed by morning frost and something deeper. When it was done, he placed her remains in the hollow and laid the fallen veil over the soil. No tombstone, no carving, only a name spoken aloud, over and over, as if weaving it into the roots of the world. Lyria. Beside the grave, Alric planted his father's old sword, rusted to the hilt. A symbol, not a weapon. Not all blades were meant to cut. They returned to Blackwood Cross by moonlight, too tired to speak, too changed to explain. Geth padded behind them like a shadow on four legs. Vecca met them at the gate, her torch low. "What did you find?" "A name," Elric said. Vecca did not ask for more. She only stepped aside and said, "Then the storm is broken." But peace did not come easy. The next morning, a rider arrived from Linden Hold, bloody and breathless, his face streaked with ash. "The Hall of Judgment," he said between gasps. "The stone cracked. The seals broke. The council chamber is gone." "Gone?" Vecca asked. He nodded. "The walls held, but the names are gone. The great ledgers, the archive. It's like the Order's memory just wiped clean." Alric stiffened. "Then it's true. She didn't destroy them. She took what they used to control." Vecca turned to him. "You gave her a name, and in doing so, gave her rest, but also gave her voice." "What does that mean?" "She is no longer pain without form. She is story now, and stories move." Alric looked east and felt it. The earth had shifted, not violently, but permanently. Days passed, then weeks. The Watchers repaired broken cairns. They re-sanctified roads. Priests blessed the stone of old chapels. But across the ridges, strange things were whispered. Villages long forgotten reappeared on maps. Children dreamed of veiled women who whispered in rhyme. Fallen statues cracked, and inside them, seeds began to grow. Something new had taken root. Something honest. Something dangerous. On the 40th day, Marshal Edrain summoned Alric to the highest tower of Linden Hold. She stood by the window, watching the mist roll over the far woods. "They're calling you the Oathbreaker's heir," she said. "The shepherd who named the nameless. I didn't ask for that. No one ever does." She turned to him. "The order is changing. The old memory is gone. What remains must be rewritten." Alric met her gaze. "With truth," she agreed. She handed him a scroll. It bore no seal, only a blank space for a signature. "The post of High Watcher is vacant," she said. "We need someone who remembers what it means to listen before judging, to forgive before punishing, to carry oaths that protect, not bind." Alric said nothing for a long moment. Then he took the scroll, signed his name, Alric of Dunlow. The hills were quiet that night. No beast stirred. No shadows whispered, but the cairn beneath the ash tree glowed faintly in the dark. And in the chapel ruins of Hollowmere, where a statue once stood in judgment, a single flower bloomed in the stone. Chapter 23. The Shepherd's Legacy. Spring came early the following year. The snow melted quick off the ridges, and the lambs were born in clusters, strong-legged and soft-voiced. Alric returned to Dunlow once, alone, wearing a gray cloak trimmed in green, the watcher's clasp at his shoulder, and calluses still on his hands. The villagers barely recognized him, except his mother. Elswith met him in the garden, where she'd begun planting again. Her cough was gone now, replaced by the firm bark of a woman who had outlived 3 wars, 1 husband, and 1 curse. "You're thinner," she said. "You're louder." They embraced like it hadn't been months since they'd seen each other. No fanfare, just warmth and relief. Eyes wise with distance. In that silence, Alaric remembered who he'd been and how far that boy had walked. Before dawn the next day, he stood once more beneath the ash tree. The cairn had not been disturbed. The sword still leaned where he'd left it, and below it, something new had grown. A rowan sprout, no taller than his knee, but stubborn. He knelt, touched its leaves, and said nothing. Some stories don't need retelling. Back at Lindenhold, things were not as quiet. The Order had begun rebuilding its memory. This time, not in stone halls or sealed scrolls, but through testimony, through song, through witness. They built a new chamber, round and windowed, where watchers sat in circles and told what they had seen, not what they had been told to see. And in the heart of that room, engraved into the floor, no judgment without voice, no oath without name, no watcher without memory. Alric oversaw the writing of the new rites, a codex of vows to replace the broken ones. He refused titles, refused banners, but they still called him High Watcher. He let them. But at night, he would ride alone through the old paths. No guards, no heralds, just him and the land, listening, watching, as he had always done. One morning, a young girl arrived at the Hold's gate. She carried a shepherd's crook and wore boots tied with wool string. Her name was Rinna, and she had seen a pale figure in her dreams, a woman with a veil who left her no fear, only questions. Alric met her at the chapel steps. She looked up at him and asked, "Were you really just a shepherd?" He smiled. "Still am." Chapter 24. The Watcher's Path. The hills had changed. Some said it was the weather. Milder now, with longer rains and softer frosts. Others claimed the land had simply forgotten how to be cruel. But those who had lived long enough knew better. The hills remembered. They remembered a man cursed and buried beneath an ash tree. They remembered a veiled figure who once sang in judgment, but now slept in peace. And they remembered the shepherd who carried no sword of silver, no name born of banners, but who stood and listened when others turned away. Alric rode often, never in the same direction, twice. The Watcher's Path, they called it now. A long, winding route that touched every cairn, every forgotten trail, every ruin once wrapped in silence. He never traveled it for glory, only to keep the memory clear. He taught others how to walk it, not in boots of war, but in the quiet steps of those who ask before they condemn, who mend before they break. The order endured, not as it was, but as it could be. Its watchers carried crooks and swords both. They walked with midwives and woodcutters. They learned the names of every stone their boots touched, and they recorded every story told in the glow of a night fire. And though monsters still stirred, some with teeth, others with titles, they were no longer met with blades alone. They were met with witness. One spring, many years later, a child tending sheep on the slopes near Dunlow looked up and saw a figure standing near the edge of the cliff. He wore no crown, no colors, only a gray cloak, and beside him a dog with wise eyes sat quietly, as though listening to the wind. The child blinked, and the figure was gone. But where he'd stood, the grass grew green, and a single flower bloomed from the root of a cairn. And so the hills endured, not because they were watched, but because they were remembered. The end.